What if the only clue to a child's disappearance was in the jaws of a stray dog? A blood-soaked shoe, a silent howl in the night, and a German shepherd who refused to be ignored. If this story grips your heart like it did ours, like this video to honor the dogs who don't need words to save lives, share it with someone who still believes in instincts, loyalty, and courage. Comment if you think even stray dogs can become heroes, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories where paws leave permanent prints on human hearts. Sometimes the loudest cries for help come from the quietest places. It started with a storm and a sound. At 3:17 a.m., a soaked, mud-covered German shepherd staggered into Station 14, a small-town firehouse on the edge of the woods. He was limping, trembling, growling at anyone who came too close. But it wasn't the dog that froze the firefighters in place. It was what he carried in his jaws, a child's sneaker, tiny, pink, and soaked in blood. Captain Reyes had been pouring his first cup of coffee when the dog arrived. The cup never made it to his lips. He recognized that shoe. It belonged to Sophie Langley, the 6-year-old girl who had vanished 2 nights ago. The entire town had been searching. Police, volunteers, helicopters, dogs. Nothing. No leads. No clues. Until now. The station went silent, except for the dog's heavy breaths and the steady drip of rainwater from his fur. He didn't bark. He didn't whine. He just stared at Reyes, then turned toward the door and waited, as if saying, "Follow me." The dog didn't wait for an invitation. He bolted from the firehouse as quickly as he'd come, disappearing into the storm-drenched streets. Captain Reyes barely had time to grab his radio and jacket before sprinting after him, calling out to his crew as he ran. "Gear up! We've got something!" The rain came down in sheets, turning roads into rivers, but the dog, later named Ranger, moved like he had a map in his mind. He led them through back alleys, down forgotten trails, and into the thickest part of the woods. Reyes kept thinking, how could a stray dog know where she is? They followed him for miles, flashlights slicing through fog, radios crackling in the background. Ranger would pause just long enough to let them catch up, his eyes wild, almost pleading, then charge forward again. Then he stopped. At the edge of an abandoned shack, one no one had thought to search. The door was half open, creaking with every gust of wind. Ranger growled low and steady, ears pinned back. Reyes raised a hand to his crew, "Wait," then stepped inside. The smell hit first. Rot, dampness, fear. And then a sound, so faint he thought he imagined it. A whimper. From beneath a pile of blankets in the corner, something moved. "Sophie," he whispered. A small face peeked out, pale, bloodied, eyes wide with terror, and then she screamed, not at Reyes, not at the crew, at something behind them, because they weren't alone in the shack. Reyes spun around, flashlight beam trembling. A shadow darted across the wall. Someone was in the shack. "Back door!" one firefighter shouted, already moving. Ranger lunged forward with a snarl, his body coiled like a spring. The girl, Sophie, was frozen, trembling behind the blankets. Reyes shielded her instinctively, heart thundering in his chest. Then a voice, rough, male, angry. "You shouldn't be here." The man stepped from the shadows, tall, filthy, eyes darting, knife in hand. His presence filled the tiny shack like a toxin. Reyes didn't blink. "Put it down." But the man only laughed, low, unhinged. She was mine to save. That's when Ranger moved. He didn't bark, didn't warn. He flew. The impact knocked the man off his feet. The knife clattered to the ground. Chaos erupted. Shouts, the girl's scream, the crackle of radios as backup arrived. Reyes scooped Sophie into his arms as Ranger held the man down, teeth bared, growling so deeply it rattled the floorboards. Firefighters swarmed the shack. The threat was over in seconds. But Sophie didn't speak. She just clung to Reyes like he was the only solid thing in a world that had gone off balance. Outside, as they wrapped her in a thermal blanket, she finally whispered something. "Not a dog," she said softly. "He's an angel." And Ranger, still standing guard, simply wagged his tail, mud-caked and bleeding, but proud. The station was unusually quiet that night. No sirens, no drills, just the soft hum of the overhead lights and the occasional squeak of boots on tile. Sophie sat wrapped in a thick navy blanket, perched on a bench too big for her small frame. Her matted hair had been gently brushed back, revealing a thin gash across her forehead, patched now with butterfly stitches. She held a cup of hot chocolate with both hands, barely sipping. Across the room, Ranger watched her intently. He hadn't left her side since the rescue. When medics tried to separate them to examine his wounds, he growled, a low, almost reluctant protest. So they patched him up right there, right next to her. Bullet grazes, thorn cuts, bruised ribs. The shepherd bore them all in silence. Reyes returned, sliding into the seat beside her. "Hey," he said gently. "They found your parents." She didn't react. "They're on their way. Should be here any minute." Still nothing. Reyes studied her carefully. "Do you want Ranger to stay until they come?" Her eyes flicked up just for a second, and then a small, almost imperceptible nod. He whistled low, and Ranger padded over, lying beside the bench with a heavy sigh, pressing his side against her feet like a heated blanket. The girl leaned down, resting her head against his shoulder, and for the first time in days, she smiled. That was the moment Reyes knew. This wasn't over, not for Sophie, and not for Ranger either. They'd both seen something dark, something most people never would, and somehow they had pulled each other back from it. The sun was just peeking over the rooftops when Reyes stepped into the firehouse kitchen, a steaming cup of coffee in one hand and a printed email in the other. His brow was furrowed. Across the room, Ranger lay curled at Sophie's feet again. She was sitting on the couch now, watching cartoons on low volume, more for the colors than the plot. Her small fingers gently stroked the dog's thick fur, lost in the rhythm. Reyes cleared his throat. "Sophie, can we talk for a minute?" She looked up slowly, eyes wide, alert. "I need to tell you something about Ranger," he said, crouching beside her. The email in his hand was from Animal Control. They'd found the dog's microchip. He hadn't just been a stray. Ranger had been a canine officer, trained, registered, and once assigned to a precinct a few towns over. But after his handler was killed in a warehouse raid, he'd run off during the memorial service. No one had seen him since. He'd been gone for 9 months, until now. And technically, he belonged to the city. There were procedures, evaluations, reassignment possibilities, or euthanasia if deemed unstable. Reyes didn't say that last part out loud. Sophie looked at him for a long time, then did something no one expected. She spoke. "He's mine," she whispered. Reyes blinked. "You haven't said a word all night," he said softly. Sophie looked down at Ranger. "He didn't talk either. But he came." Ranger pressed his snout into her hand like a silent confirmation. Reyes rubbed his jaw. There might be a way, he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. He looked at the pair, broken, quiet, whole only when together. And just like that, a decision sparked. "I'll fight for him," Reyes said. Sophie didn't say thank you. She just leaned her head back onto Ranger's shoulder and kept breathing. Later that evening, the firehouse was quieter than usual. The crew had just returned from a false alarm at a warehouse uptown, and Reyes sat in his small office, staring at the flickering screen of his laptop. Sophie and Ranger were fast asleep on the old couch outside his door. Captain Harris stepped in, still in uniform, removing his gloves. A man of few words, hardened by decades of smoke and sirens, but there was always a glimmer of something softer beneath his gruff demeanor. "She said her first words, huh?" Harris said, jerking his chin toward the couch. Reyes nodded. "He brought her back, Cap, somehow." Harris stepped closer, eyes on the dozing pair. "Back when I was stationed in Brooklyn, we had a dog like that, German Shepherd, named Boomer. Saved 2 kids from a burning apartment. After that, he was never quite the same. Wouldn't go near a fire truck. Couldn't sleep unless he was curled up beside the oldest boy he'd saved." He paused, voice quiet. "Some of them don't move on until they've found their next mission." Reyes looked up. "So what do I do? Animal control wants him evaluated. If he doesn't pass, they'll put him down," Harris finished grimly. Reyes swallowed. "I can file an appeal. Claim him as an emotional support animal. But the paperwork, the fees, I'll cover them," Harris interrupted. Reyes blinked. "You think I've lasted 30 years in this job by not recognizing a hero when I see one?" Harris grunted. "That mutt dragged a bloody shoe to our front door and led us to a missing girl. That's the stuff of legends." They stood there in silence, both watching as Sophie stirred in her sleep, curling tighter into Ranger's side. Then Harris added, "The city has rules, but sometimes the heart's got better ones." Reyes smiled faintly, and in that moment, a captain passed the torch, not with words, but with the kind of silent support that builds real change. The next morning, Sophie sat cross-legged on a blanket at the fire station, crayons scattered around her and Ranger's head resting on her lap. She was drawing, something she hadn't done in months. A badge, just like the one Reyes wore, except this one had a paw print in the middle. Above it, she carefully wrote in shaky letters, "Fire Dog Ranger." Reyes watched from the bay door, his heart tugging. This wasn't just recovery, it was restoration, but not everyone saw it that way. By noon, an officer from Animal Control arrived, clipboard in hand, and a grim expression on her face. "We'll need to take him in for a 72-hour behavioral evaluation. Stray dogs involved in emergency situations have to be assessed." Sophie overheard. She clutched Ranger's collar with both hands and shouted, "No, he's mine. He found me. He's not dangerous." Ranger, sensing her distress, stood between her and the officer, eyes alert but calm. He didn't growl. He didn't flinch. He just stood his ground. Reyes stepped in, shielding them both. "You'll have to go through me first. I've started the paperwork to register him as an emotional support animal. But the dog's unchipped, unregistered, and technically a stray. Without documentation, we can't allow this." Then a voice chimed in from behind them. It was Captain Harris, holding a sealed manila envelope. "Not anymore." He handed over a veterinary record from the city's clinic, microchip registration, and a notarized affidavit from the fire department, naming Ranger an honorary firehouse companion. The officer glanced between the documents and the people gathered. A crowd had formed. Firefighters, neighbors, even the local news, drawn by the story of a dog who delivered a bloody shoe to a fire station and saved a sick girl. Sophie looked up. "Can't he stay with me? Please? He makes my heart not hurt." That simple sentence silenced everyone. The officer softened. "I'll make a note in the report. We'll give him a provisional stay. But this isn't over." Sophie didn't hear the warning, just the word stay. She hugged Ranger tightly. "You hear that? You're staying." Reyes crouched beside her. "We're going to make it official, kiddo. Just you wait. You." A week later, Reyes stood beside Sophie at the county courthouse. She wore her favorite overalls, scuffed white sneakers, and clutched Ranger's leash like a lifeline. Her hair was pulled into pigtails, and in her small hands she held the drawing she had made, the badge that said Fire Dog Ranger. The courtroom was packed. News crews, firefighters in uniform, neighbors. Even the mayor had shown up, seated quietly in the back. The judge, a stern-looking woman with silver hair and kind eyes, tapped her gavel. "We are here today to determine the permanent placement of an unclaimed canine and whether the petition to assign him as an emotional support animal to minor Sophie Bennett is in the best interest of all parties involved." Animal control made their case first, emphasizing rules, policies, and protocols. They brought up the risk of trauma bonding, the absence of any verified prior ownership, and the potential for future liability. Then Reyes stood. He spoke of the night the dog appeared, of the bloody shoe, the search that followed, the rescue, the doctors who confirmed that Sophie wouldn't have survived another hour without medical care. He handed the judge a letter from the hospital confirming the timing. Another from Sophie's psychologist explaining how Ranger's presence had accelerated her healing in ways no therapy alone could. Finally, he called Sophie to the stand. She climbed up onto the chair, feet swinging, voice small but steady. She placed her drawing in front of the judge. "He's not just a dog. He's my best friend," she said. "When I was too scared to talk, he didn't care. When I got sick again and the medicine made me sad, he put his head on my lap. He doesn't leave me. I feel safe when he's there." There was silence in the room. The judge looked down at the paper badge, then up at the child whose life had been changed by a stray who refused to walk away. "I've never had a case like this," she said slowly. "But the law isn't only about rules. It's also about justice. And in this courtroom's opinion, justice has 4 legs and a paw print badge." The gavel struck. Tears erupted from the crowd. Reyes beamed. Sophie gasped and hugged Ranger so tightly his ears flattened. And Ranger, ever calm, ever loyal, let out a single soft bark, as if he understood the weight of the moment. From that day on, Ranger was no longer a stray. He was family. Months passed, and Sophie was no longer the quiet girl who hid behind her bangs. With Ranger by her side, she smiled more, played louder, and even returned to school. Ranger came with her sometimes, lying patiently by her desk, his brown eyes following her every move. He wore an official vest now, emotional support animal stitched across one side, and a homemade badge pinned on the other, laminated and decorated with glitter. It read, "Ranger, Fire Station Hero." The town knew his story. Children waved when they saw him. Neighbors left treats on their porch. Firefighters joked that he was the station's most reliable crew member, never late, always listening, and always first to respond when Sophie needed comfort. Reyes kept the bloody shoe in a glass case on a shelf at the fire station. Above it, a plaque read, "To the dog who didn't speak, but still told us everything." And Sophie? She began drawing again. She drew stories of dogs who saved people, of little girls who weren't afraid anymore, of nights that ended in light, not fear. Her favorite was a picture of her and Ranger running through a field, the sun behind them, her arms outstretched and his ears flapping like wings. That image hung on her bedroom wall. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the world in gold, Sophie sat on the porch steps beside Ranger. She leaned her head against his side. "Thank you," she whispered. Ranger didn't move, just stayed, like he always had. A warm spring breeze rustled the tall grass in the field behind Sophie's house. The sky was a watercolor wash of lavender and peach, the kind of evening that feels like a held breath before a wish is made. Sophie, now stronger, more radiant, ran barefoot through the meadow, her laughter echoing like wind chimes. Ranger chased her, his powerful legs moving with grace, his tail high, his black and gray fur catching the sunlight like silver. He was no longer astray, no longer alone. He was home. As they reached the top of the hill, Sophie stopped and turned back. Below them, the fire station lights blinked gently. Her town, her people, her life. She knelt beside Ranger, threw her arms around his thick neck, and whispered, "You saved me." Ranger licked her cheek once and sat tall beside her, his silhouette noble against the setting sun. Together, they watched the last light fade from the sky, side by side. A girl once broken by fear, a dog once discarded, now unbreakable, now family, and somewhere, far off in the quiet stillness, a siren wailed. Ranger's ears perked up. Sophie stood and nodded. "Let's go, hero." They ran, toward the lights, toward the sound, toward whatever came next, because some stories don't end, they just begin again.